Welcome to the Christian Woman Leadership Podcast, where we hope to inspire you to embrace your God-given gifts, skills, and passions in order to lead with confidence. We want you to remember that you are fearfully and wonderfully made in the image of God, and you are fully loved by Him.
You have been designed on purpose by God with unique gifts and passions in order to love and lead those around you. I'm your host, Esther Littlefield, a pastor's wife, business owner, mom, and writer.
And I'm Esther's co-host, Holly Kane. I'm a wife, mom, and business owner. I also write at hollykane.org, where I focus on my passion for women's ministry.
Together, we chat about important issues that Christian women leaders face. In addition, we interview other women just like you who lead in various roles, from church to community to business. Through this podcast, we offer you encouragement, tools, and resources to help you on your leadership journey. We are so glad you're here with us. Welcome to today's episode. I am so excited for you to be here with me today. And today I am talking with Merritt Onsa. Merritt longs to see the love of Jesus set women free from the bondage of fear, shame, and comparison so that their lives will sing His praises and their dreams will become alive. As host of the Devoted Dreamers podcast, she interviews Christian women about their God-shaped dreams. Merritt and her homebrewing, community-building husband, Todd, live with their two daughters near Colorado's Rocky Mountains. Welcome, Merritt, to the show today.
Hi, Esther. Thanks so much for having me.
Yes, I am thrilled that we are able to talk today, and I'm really excited to hear more about your leadership journey. We actually have gotten to know each other online and offline a little bit in the recent year. And I'm excited to just hear more of your story. So as we get started, Merritt, can you just share with us about your leadership journey and tell us more about how you have come to, now what you're doing with the Devoted Dreamers podcast?
Sure. And this was a really fun question to think about because I had to go back and just inquire of my early years and wonder where did it start? And I think you and I have shared with each other, I was pretty shy as a kid. And I think that probably was most severe in middle school, as maybe most people struggle in middle school. But even during that season, I was drawn to things that put me into leadership roles, but I don't know that I would have called it leadership at the time. I think I was probably too insecure to say oh, I'm a leader. But I was involved in some youth leadership activities, related to school and outside of school. And then as I kind of got into high school and college, I found myself just wanting to pursue roles that gave me greater responsibility. I do remember having this feeling in my heart, though, that in order to have a voice, someone had to choose me. So I needed to be elected to a role or, pointed out by a teacher or whatever. And that just seems really interesting to me now. I think that's shaped a lot of things for me. Not that I think that's necessarily good.
Yeah.
I remember that feeling for sure.
Mm-hmm.
But I am a learner at heart and always kind of longing to improve and do better. One on the Enneagram over here, just like you.
So. Fellow Enneagram ones for all of our Enneagram friends out there.
Yes, I always wanted to be better, which meant I pursued a lot of opportunities to be in leadership roles. And even though I felt really kind of weak and unqualified and unsure of myself, maybe that was how I compensated for it. So I went on from there. I have a master's degree in college student development, so I ended up working with a lot of student leaders, and it may be around there that I kind of started to flourish a little bit more in my confidence and my leadership. But I've always served in different volunteer roles, whether in church or nonprofits, that kind of thing. And then in 2004, I started my own business, which now I'm like, oh yeah, that took some leadership. It became mostly out of desperation, but you kind of got to step up when you say you're going to do that. And, but yeah, I don't know if you want me to get into podcasting here.
Yeah, I would love to hear. Yeah. So you started your own business, and then tell us from there, like, how did
Yeah,
you end up doing what you're doing now? Because I don't think you're still doing that business.
I'm
You're doing
not.
the podcast. So
Well,
tell
not
us how that
really.
happened.
Yeah, so in 2004, I left kind of the dot-com world and was burned out and exhausted and decided to do freelance writing just because that was where I had skills and experience. And I did that for 12 years. And it was all work for clients where I was interviewing people, behind closed doors. No one ever heard the interview, but it was for my notes in the writing that I was doing and the articles that I wrote. And then, let's see, in early 20, no, I'm going to go earlier than that.
Okay.
I was doing a blog called the Marriage Readiness Project. And I had this huge passion for single women who were not yet married. And it was kind of later in life. I didn't get married till I was 39. And I really felt like this was a space where I could share what I had learned along the way and encourage some women. Like, I think I felt pretty alone being single that long, not just like relationally that I didn't have somebody, but that I didn't know. I feel like I knew more couples than I knew other single women.
Right.
So I started this blog and, wasn't super committed to it because I had a full-time job and was super busy. I have perspective on that now that with 2 kids, but as a single person or a newly married person at that point. But I had a friend who had a podcast and I was kind of aware of podcasts and had listened to Serial, like the crime show, whatever that is, on NPR. But she had a podcast through Christ on Pop Culture and asked in January of 2016 to interview me about my blog for single women because they were starting to just want to talk about this topic of online ministry, like where you're not meeting with people face to face, but you're connecting to them in a ministerial way.
Yeah.
So that was January of 2016. And it was so fun. And I remember sitting, in the cold, dark basement and my baby was asleep upstairs and I was just praying she wasn't going to wake up. And we had fun. I was super nervous. But it was fun. Like I really enjoyed doing that. And a couple of my friends heard that and said to me, if you have ever thought of doing a podcast, you really should. Like, you have a great radio voice. I was like, oh, okay. Actually, this sounds like fun. And the more I started to piece it together, the more I realized I had been interviewing people for 12 years and this should not be that hard. Like I would have to get through the technical pieces of it. But turns out my husband had some of those skills. So I began to just pray and ask God, like, what would you have me do? And in the back of my mind was like, oh, is it something for singles? And at the same time, I was trying to figure out how I really wanted to grow my blog and what services I would offer if I was going to try to offer some services. And I was interviewing a ton of single women to just glean from them what their needs were. And the more I dug into it and the more I prayed, I realized that I was so far now from that stage of my life that, being single in 2016 was very different than being single in 2008 because of the internet and online dating. And I was like, I don't know that I have anything to offer that. And so I kind of let that dream go and began to realize like, oh, I do have this dream to communicate something and my heart is really for women. Like, what is it? And there was so much anxiety wrapped up in how I was going to do that blog and getting started and finding a way to like make it purposeful that I realized I must not be the only one wrestling with purpose and dreams and wanting to do something but not knowing the next step. So I thought, why don't I start talking to women who are further down that road than I am? And I started with my friend who interviewed me She was my very first interview. And I began somewhat clumsily. I mean, I was pretty open. Like, I think I talked about, being nervous and having, like, at the end of an interview, like, I have to go change my shirt because it's totally sweated out, like totally pitted out. Like, I'm so gross right now, and just try to be really open with the struggle.
Mm-hmm.
And that first season, it was not even called Devoted Dreamers at that point. It was called Momentum. But I learned so much from other women, to hear someone that was, an author of a book or, a well-known speaker say, yeah, I have fear and I'm nervous and I'm probably going to get it wrong at some point. And to hear people that I really admired say that, I was like, hey, maybe I'm normal. So I have been hosting this podcast that's now called Devoted Dreamers since June of 2016. I feel like when I made the decision to do it, it was April of that year. And I really just gave myself a deadline. Like, you have 2 months to do it. Because if I'm not going to do it in that 2 months, like, I'm probably just not going to do it. And just kind of let God take me on that journey. And I allowed myself to make some mistakes, which is really hard for one.
Yeah.
But it has been the most fun. I mean, I love doing this so much, and I have learned so much from the women that I get to talk to. I know you probably have that experience too as a host.
Yeah.
So almost 3 years, not counting one maternity leave, is how long I've been doing this.
Okay. Yeah. And so really stepping out and doing that took leadership. Like,
yeah,
I think that you did you perceive that as leadership when you did it? Like, did you see that as a way to lead?
I'm not sure I would have put that word to it. But the thing that kept spinning in my mind in that season was, like, all the time I see people doing things that they just made up. Like, someone somewhere made up kickboxing, someone somewhere, like, just decided to start making chia seed pudding, it's just, it was like, is that a thing that I could create something that didn't exist before?
Yeah.
And I really wanted to do that. Like, it really, it like lit a fire within me. And so, and I'm not sure at first I was truly thinking about the leadership that it would be for the women who would listen.
Mm-hmm.
But I have since seen just amazing response, like people thanking me that I've never even seen their name before. And this message just pops up in my DMs or something. And they're like, I was bawling this morning when I was listening to your episode. I'm like, what?
Yeah.
I'm grateful. I'm grateful to get that kind of feedback.
Right. Okay. So I have a couple more questions about this whole leadership journey. So tell me, where along that journey did you realize that you were a leader? Was there a specific point, or has it just been a gradual experience?
Probably in high school, I would have had an opportunity where someone called me a leader, and I thought, okay. And you did ask me offline about mentors, and there was a man who served like our student council staff person, whatever they call that, but the person who advised us. And it was probably him that pointed it out to me and made me begin to think, what does this actually mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it would have been in high school.
Okay. So I've heard you talk on your own podcast, and if you haven't listened to Devoted Dreamers, I definitely encourage you guys to check it out. But you've shared a bit, Merritt, about your faith journey. So I'd love for you to share with us about that and how that has played a role in your story.
Yeah, I will try to make that a short story. So I came to know Christ at the age of 30 and probably kicking and screaming. I grew up in a home where my parents had really been inundated with religion in their growing up. And so while it was a part of them and probably really important to my grandparents, it had kind of lost its luster by the time my parents were raising kids. And so I remember at 8 years old, they sat us down and we had this conversation as a family, and it was like, do you guys still want to go to church? And we were like, nah. and I don't remember ever being in church as a kid and being inspired or curious about God. I think it was dry. It was boring. I was the kid that didn't know any of the Bible stories, and that was embarrassing. And so it was just much easier to not be there. And though I still believe that God always pursued me now when I'm looking back at it, but I ran pretty hard away from anything that would have been, like I wanted to be perceived as a good girl, but I didn't really follow that road. I was kind of a bad girl. I was a good girl in disguise, or a bad girl in disguise, whichever it was.
Yeah.
So I got really, my passion and my desire as a young person was for someone to be in love with me and vice versa. And so I was obsessed with boys and dating and relationships, and eventually, that kind of always was my story. And then as I got older, parties and drinking and promiscuity and just really trying to seek my self and my identity and my value in other people. And it was a pretty destructive path now that I look back on it. And I did a lot of rationalization, well, this time it's going to be different. And it was never different for, a really long time. So all of my 20s, I really just wanted to be married, and there was never, it just never happened. And I fought for it, and I struggled for it, and I tried to keep relationships together, and it just crushed me every time. And by the time I was in my late 20s, we had lost a family member, and I had sat in the room and watched him die. And I had already had questions like, oh, well, I should maybe find a church, or it would be nice to know more about God, or, just kind of having some of those quandaries in my own heart. And I got hired when I was talking about being in the .com world. I got hired for a job in Dallas, Texas in 2000, I guess. And everyone at that company was a Christian. And I was like, well, I'm fine with that as long as you just don't push it on me. And they were like, yeah, we're fine. No big deal. And it was such a crushing season of my life. I had moved to Dallas with an ex-boyfriend. He was also working for the company. He was also not a believer. And the way that played out drove him to Christ, and ultimately drove me to open my eyes and realize that I had been trying to be my own salvation, and I was failing miserably. And there was a day when I finally feel like I heard the gospel for the first time. And now I'm like, I probably heard it a million times. And it wasn't until that day when I was, it was a cold February morning. I was sitting in my lonely apartment in Dallas, Texas. And believe it or not, I got saved by a website.
Oh my goodness.
There was a church website that was walked me through the gospel, and I was seriously clueless. I didn't know that this is what I was reading through. And they just said, when you get to the end of this, basically a PowerPoint, there will be a free gift for you. And I was like, I want that t-shirt. But as it turns out, the free gift was Jesus, and I needed it desperately. And I say kicking and screaming because it really took the next 5 years for me to recover from the damage I had done to my own life and my heart. And spent a lot of time in Celebrate Recovery and talking and sharing with leaders and other women about my past and the shame that I held on to because of all of the things that I had done. And Jesus wiped me clean from all of it, and began to, that's actually, I hadn't even thought about that, but that became such a role of leadership for me, because as I was serving in ministry, people were asking me to share my story more publicly. And we were part of a pretty big church, to the point where like I shared, not details, but I shared intimate things with the entire church on a video. And for years, women would walk up to me and say, "You're that girl. You're the one." When I heard what you said, it gave me permission to tell someone about my past. And I was like, wow, God, you are big. You are so big that you took my shame and you turned it into freedom for me and for others. And, there's no better thing than Jesus. So,
yeah.
The ultimate leader.
Yeah. That's so amazing. I love that, Merritt. Thank you for sharing. What do you think? So Merritt, you said that it took you 5 years to kind of my question. Recover and take a drink, heal. Take a pause, and my dog decides to bark from everything that had happened before. Can you share some of the things that you did? He hasn't been barking lately. He's been in that recovery process. I know you mentioned Celebrate Recovery. And it's really sad there for anyone that might be in a similar place. So he's really, but it's been quieter because he hasn't been barking as much. So
the 12 steps are something that I was like, that's not for me. That is for people who are on drugs, and I had a friend who was a recovering alcoholic who was kind of like urging me to go. And I'm like, I don't know. I don't even know why I'm here. But this is relevant to anybody. So the things that I learned there that were so helpful in healing were doing this searching and fearless moral inventory. So I spent time looking at my entire life, and the people, the incidents, and it was wherever something triggered emotion in me, and I wrote that down. And as I went through that process and kind of finished a very big document, multiple page document, then they tell you like, okay, well, now you get a chance to share it with somebody. And I was like, well, that's the worst day of my life. Tell anyone these things.
Yeah.
But the woman who was my leader was the most kind, gentle, grace-filled person. She was the person that God gave me to kind of, vomit out all that I had lived and experienced and to receive grace for that. And so confession was huge. And I would say that for, anybody, anywhere, that confessing your past or whatever is holding you back from really being who God created you to be is huge. And then obviously, you confess the sin, you confess the struggle or the fear or whatever it was, and then repenting and turning back away from it. And then once I had kind of gone through kind of this excruciating journey, then there's this practice of doing a daily moral inventory. And so every day, and I probably don't do this as much as I should now, or maybe it just happens differently in my life, but at the end of the day, to look at your day and say, is there a place where I need to confess to God? Like, was I unkind to somebody, or, did I have an attitude that was not of Him, or was I, acting entitled about something? I mean, once I got through the big things there, there's always these little things that can poison your heart, even though they're tiny. And so that was the most impactful practice. And I do think it still influences me today, because I'm trying now to teach my 4-year-old about how we talk to each other, the tone of voice that we use, and, being respectful and saying please and thank you, all the things that you try to teach your little kids. And then yesterday at dinner, I was a little bit on edge. She said, "Mommy, I don't like that voice you're using." I was like, "You don't like this voice? How about a different voice?" Pretty self-righteous in my response. And as time went on, I finished preparing dinner and do whatever I needed to do. And then the spirit in me was like, mm-mm. And I went over to her and I was like, "You know what, little 4-year-old, you were a leader right there. You just helped Mommy realize that I had done something that was not of Christ. It was not in love. And I'm so sorry. Will you forgive me?" And, "Well, what does forgive mean?" And I'm like, "Okay, well, we'll cover that." But, to make this a daily practice where you are always examining where you're falling short and owning it, and then moving on, move on, don't hang in that, is huge. And I think that's been helpful for our marriage and life in general. It's been helpful in my relationship with my parents. There was something that happened when I was 13 years old and became the thing that I hid from for the rest of my life. And probably I don't think I was married yet. So it was probably 20 years. Then I went back to them and confessed and owned it. And, they were like, "Yeah, we knew. We knew." And that released something in me. And so this practice of confession and repentance and forgiveness is huge. I think it's any leader, anyone needs those tools in their life.
Yeah. Yeah. So powerful and important. And I love how you pointed out that your daughter led you, and that God can use anyone and anything in our lives to lead us back to Him. So it's amazing. So part of leadership is self-awareness. And really what we're just talking about is this aspect of self-awareness in terms of recognizing our sin and our need for forgiveness and all of that. But I would love to know what else you have used. Have there been any tools or resources that have been helpful for you to grow as a leader, or just to grow in your understanding of how God has made you and how you can best serve Him?
It's been important to get to that place of God made me this way. I think you and I talked about this on my podcast. To understand that I am detail oriented for a reason, and I want to research things to the ends of the earth for a reason, and that it is not a flaw in me. I am certainly still sinful, but the two tools that I'm thinking of are the Strengths Finder and the Enneagram, which we've mentioned. I just took the Enneagram probably a year ago, and I have tons to learn still. And somebody along the way said, "Oh, this isn't just for you. It isn't just for you to understand yourself. It is for you to understand others." And that has been really helpful for me to not just look at one. Let's look at one and see what one does and be affirmed in all of my weirdness. No, I have a friend who's, a 2 or a 3 or a 5. How are they wired? And, why might I misunderstand them because of our differences and how we're wired? And, and who's the number that's going to help me loosen up a little bit more? And I think that's 7s.
Yes.
I need more 7s in my life. So those two have been really great. The Strengths Finder I took many years ago, and an input was the one that, my husband went, "Oh, okay." That is just input is you're like constantly looking for information about something and, collecting information. And I'm like, oh my gosh, that's totally me. And you should see my desk. It's covered. But yeah, those two tools have been really helpful.
Okay.
I will say something else kind of more in my youth, but I really love high ropes courses.
Oh, wow.
I don't know if
That's
you've ever
cool.
done high
I
rope.
have, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, that just like popped into
Scary.
my head. It's terrifying. I'm not sure I could do it now, but that is probably, those experiences were probably the things that helped me understand too, like what leadership is, how important it is, what's my role as a leader and or as a follower, like how important it is for me to look to the leader when I know who that is, and also be leading as a follower. So yeah, just the conversations that came out of doing ropes courses, it's been impactful for sure in my younger years.
Yeah. And I think that's such a cool thing that you pointed out. I had a few different experiences in my teen years and college that, were like those kind of experiential learning things. And I think that it definitely pushes you to use your gifts. And it also reveals a lot of the weaknesses that we have, which we need to be aware of again as leaders. So super helpful.
And that we all have, and see the importance of like, oh, if I partner with this person, together we'll be better.
Yes, right. We cannot do any of these things alone. So you mentioned, this idea of kind of accepting how God has wired you and not trying to, I don't know what the word is, but get rid of those unique qualities that you have.
Yeah.
And I know you've done a podcast episode on this, so if you just want to refer to that, that's fine. But can you share how you've learned to embrace your identity in Christ and as a child of God?
Oh my gosh, how have I done that?
When in this journey did that start to take place?
It's probably pretty recent. I went through a phase for sure in the first 10 years of walking with Christ, of realizing that I attended a church that I loved and was integral in teaching me about Jesus. But when I was there at this particular place in life, all I heard was what I had to do and who I had to be. Like, well, you just need to be more kind. And I'm like, I cannot make myself more kind. I don't know how to do that. I am a complete failure. And I mean, I sat in a restaurant with friends after church, just bawling my eyes out. Like, I don't know how to do this. I'm incapable of it. And I was missing it. Like, I'm sure the gospel was in there, but I was totally missing it. And I needed, that's one of the things I think I've realized too. I've needed teaching that really is scripture. Like, we are walking through this book of the Bible and the relating it back to the cross and redemption through Christ, and that I really am incapable of any of it on my own. And so you're referring to the episode, I think, that I did in January called "You're a Daughter of the Most High King," and it was like, I've started to do these one solo episode a month for this year. And I really wanted that to be my first one, because I feel like if we're going to dream God-shaped dreams, as I call them, we first have to know who we are. And if we don't believe who we are, we're going to flounder and be anxious and try to do it on our own strength and wonder why it's not working out. And so, I think that's really, like, I do say often to my guests, probably mostly offline, but just like what the dream is not quite as important as what God is going to do with you in the dream. So, whatever, you might want to be a yoga instructor, like, I don't know, whatever your dream is. But if it's something that pushes you beyond yourself, that you you can depend on your strengths, but you probably don't have all the strengths that you need to pursue that thing. And so when you take that back to the Lord and just say, I don't know. I don't know what to do. I don't know how to take the next step. Will you please teach me? Will you please show me? I want Jesus to get the glory for this. And so, kind of like Moses, like he didn't part the Red Sea. It was God that parted the Red Sea. And so, it's like, okay, if anything good is going to come of my life, it's going to have to be because he did it with me. Like he did it. And I got to be there for it and see him shine.
Yeah.
And then go, hey, look, who did that? God did that. And he's worth following. He is so trustworthy. And so, I really do feel like it's been, like, to answer your question, just in the last couple of years that I have felt able to own that. Like, I'm God's kid. And there is nothing that has happened in my life that he didn't know about. There's nothing that is going to happen that's difficult that he won't be there for. This is a totally separate topic, but we struggle with infertility for a really long time. And, it's like he was in all of that. And I think it was in the hard things in my life where I could go, God was there. He was there for me to turn to. He rescued me in it. I might not have gotten the result I expected, but that's not really about me anyway, it's really about him. And so, I think I'm still in process. There are definitely days where I forget whose I am. But I do feel it like growing in strength in me that I'm his special girl.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it is a process. And going back to the whole self-awareness as Enneagram ones, which we both are, which if you're listening and you're not, I'm sure there's something that you can identify for yourself that you struggle with. But for me, it's always been a struggle because I feel like I have to do things to please God, right? Like, so I need to be getting everything right, hitting all the check marks, getting all the things correct. And whether that is something I learned from childhood or whether that's something from not quite right biblical teaching, or if it's just internally what I perceived. I don't know exactly where it came from, but it's hard to let go of that. Yeah. And it's a constant transformation of our minds and our hearts that we need in order to truly embrace that identity that he wants us to have.
For sure. Yeah, if we don't know the truth, if we don't know what God's word says, it's pretty hard to believe it because you don't know it. Like if it's never entered your brain. So
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you shared a little bit about this whole dreaming thing, and obviously your podcast is all about dreaming. So I would love to know, for any woman that's listening who maybe has had a flicker of a dream, but is afraid or isn't sure if it's even from God. Do you have any advice or any encouragement for her on how to just kind of get started?
Yes. There's a lot of directions I could go with this, but I think one is to really think about who does your dream serve. So, the greatest commandment is to love God and love our neighbor. And so who's your neighbor that your dream will love? So that's one simple, well, probably not simple, but it's one thing to begin to understand that. And for me, it was, what was pointing me back to him? What was causing me to lean into him more? If it was something that I was like, I could do that like in my sleep. Well, that might still be something for me to do, but it's probably not my God-shaped dream. So I think the biggest thing, and I love the way that you asked that question because there are definitely I hear from a lot of women who are like, well, I'm not sure if this is it, or I don't want to waste my time pursuing something that really isn't the thing that he has for me. And to me, that sounds like a lot of fear and anxiety. And so as I thought through this question, the big thing that came up for me was to trust your Father, and that requires being in God's word. We just talked about this. And, you know, again, that doesn't have to look a specific way. That look at your life stage and figure out where, if you're not in God's word on a regular basis, where can you be more so, even if it's one verse a day?
Yeah.
But find what works for your life. And then, I just feel like if you're not leaning into him, and if he is not calling you to something that requires you to lean into him, I think you can kind of expect that to continue to flounder.
Yeah.
But I do believe that when you have that flicker, and for me, it was the thing that kept me up at night. Like, I'd be on my phone, like texting myself, because didn't want to get up to take a note. So I'm texting myself in the middle of the night, and then, I'm on airplane mode, and all these texts come in the next morning. It's like, oh yeah, I remember thinking about that. But if that thing keeps burning, like, I would just say, continue to turn to him and trust whatever next step he has just made you aware of. And it doesn't have to be something big. Like, tiny little baby steps are really how we get there. And, there's not a finish line anyway. So
yeah. I 100% agree with you. And I think we had the same conversation when I was on your podcast. So
I'm sure we did.
I'll put the link in the show notes if you want to listen to that. The whole conversation is not exactly the same. So. But this part, but this idea of the pressure that we put on ourselves to find the thing, the one thing. And that means that I must get it right from the very beginning. That's right. Have you seen that? And I'm just curious about people that you've taught to in your interviews. Like, have you found that there's some people that have a very clear, like, vision from God, and then others that sort of take these little tiny steps along the way? And
oh yeah. When I have the guests who are like, yes, God gave me this dream in my sleep, and then I woke up one day and started doing it. I'm like, okay, well, that's not fair. It's really hard for the rest of us.
Right.
But I do think, like, I probably needed to struggle a little bit, I probably needed to struggle and work through stuff and fail at some things. Like, my pastor always says to me, like, as a one, it would be good for you to practice failing. It's like, oh, like, I don't really want to. Thanks a lot. That's like the worst thing ever. But yeah, I mean, I needed to wrestle, because otherwise I wouldn't really need him, I mean, I'm pretty independent, can do things on my own. Like, so he continues to put me in a place to need him. And that is how I know, like, yep, this is from him. But yeah, I would say it's not easy for most. That it is there is a process. It's a process of trusting him, of taking a step. And then even if you think in your mind where you're going, he obviously can redirect you at any time. And just to be open and aware and willing for that. Like, you never know what he's going to show you, and it's going to be good. If it's from him, it's totally going to be good. So kind of getting over yourself, it's a big deal.
It does help. It does help. And I love what you started with too, where you said, who is the dream serving? Because if the thing that you're pondering is all about you, then you can probably know that it's not from God. That it's, if it's all about you getting the fame and the glory, then that's probably not the thing.
Yeah.
That he's putting on your heart.
Yep. That's probably you putting that there.
Yeah.
Sorry.
But at the same time, I do think that you can have a dream from God that can also light you up and give you tons of joy and blessing from it too.
Absolutely. So. I agree.
So I don't know if I've heard you share, Merritt, and maybe you've shared this on one of your episodes. I don't know if I've listened to all of them, but what is your dream?
um, so you read it at the beginning, and
Okay.
it was funny. As you read it, I was like, I'm still editing this statement.
Okay. I should have paid more attention to what I was
No, it's fine.
reading.
Because I mean, even when I sent it to you, I was like, oh, this is a different version than the last time I said it. And I feel like there's a better way to say it. Always, there's going to be a better way to say it. But I have this longing to see God's women set free from the bondage of fear, shame, and comparison,
Mm,
so that their lives might sing God's praises and that they might be able to pursue their dreams. And so I'm not sure I knew that was my dream at the beginning. And I just knew there was something about women, and there was something about freedom. But it really took, again, like sitting down with my pastor, and we had done a leadership course last year at this time. And this was great. He met with each one of us, and we had taken the Enneagram, and he had learned about each one of us and our passions. And then he asked us to write this statement of like, well, what is your life about? You know, beyond like the more detail than love God and love neighbor.
yeah.
And through like weeping and many tears, this is kind of what came out. And so I think it's not, oh, I want every woman to pursue their dream. It's that I want every woman to feel free, and I want her to know Jesus, and I want her to, you know, in that freedom, be unleashed to be who God made her to be. And that is so about it, my journey.
Yeah.
And I always feel like God lets us dream in the places that he's worked in us in the deepest ways. And so I'm still figuring out how that all plays out. But yeah, that would be amazing if I got to do that for the rest of my life.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It's beautiful. So I think we've talked about parts of that in this conversation, but we'll wrap up soon. But I just have to ask you about the comparison piece, and
Yeah.
how have you experienced that in your pursuit of your dreams and of Jesus, and how do you see that affecting women in general in their pursuit of their God-shaped dream?
Yeah. So I was just thinking about this the other day, but when I started podcasting, and like I said, I had listened to the Serial podcast, which is a very different type of podcast than the one that I do. And I had listened to Startup and some other like very professional podcasts. And then I started listening to Jamie Ivey. And at that point, I wanted to start a podcast. And it was like, so am I trying to be Jamie Ivey? No, because I'm pretty sure she's not a one. Like it would be impossible for me to be Jamie Ivey.
Yeah.
But I mean, there was a season. I mean, I love her. She's winsome and funny. And I mean, she makes it look so easy.
Yeah.
And I think I needed to study her for a little while to figure out like, do I do anything like her? Do I do something similar to her? How do I mean, it really was comparing myself to her. But then I had to stop listening to Jamie Ivey for a little while because I am never going to be her. And God didn't make me to be Jamie Ivey. He made Jamie Ivey to be Jamie Ivey. And there are people that, maybe she doesn't appeal to. And so they might listen to my podcast.
Yeah.
But it's definitely, I mean, I think it's a real thing. Probably, a real thing for women that we struggle with, that we're constantly looking to what somebody else is doing and wondering, could I, or should I, or, oh gosh, I'll never be able to, or, all of that. What was the second part of your question?
Oh, just if you've seen that with other, with the women that you've interviewed or other women that you've talked about their dreams, like, is that a big hang up for the majority of us, do you think? Or I don't know. I guess
Yeah, I think it can be. I mean, even to the more simple things like scrolling through Instagram and being like, well, that person's house is really clean, you know?
One tiny section of it is.
Yes, this corner of their house is very clean for that photo shoot. So yeah, I think it's common, and it's something the enemy uses to distract us. And I think we have to continue to go back to, well, who did God make me? And, if it does mean a social media fast or a fast from that person's whatever, like me and Jamie Ivy's podcast.
Yeah.
I probably should get back into it, but it's not healthy, and it is not of God. And it takes us back to that question of identity. Like, am I trying to be somebody that I'm not? And is this from God? No, never. It's never from him. So yeah, I do think it's common, and I do think it's worth fighting that, because that's just garbage in our brains.
Yeah. And I would say, I think that might be one of the biggest things that keeps women from pursuing their dreams, because they are so focused on what other people are doing, and that they're not going to be at that same. It's like you looking at Jamie Ivy when Jamie Ivy had been podcasting for who knows how long, and you were just starting out. Like it's not even fair. Even if everything else was fine, it's not even fair to compare that to that.
Yes. Can I share a story?
Yeah, I would love a story.
Came up for me. I think this was where comparison changed for me. I have now mentioned yoga. This is the second time, but I love my yoga teacher. So this was a couple years ago, probably when I had first started podcasting, and I was in this yoga class, and, like I'm the girl that my shirt doesn't quite fit right, and I haven't got new leggings in a while. And, and there's always somebody that's like, well, they just walked out of Athleta and, and there's no body fat.
Yeah.
And so this particular day, I'm in yoga class, and I love it because I feel so strong when I leave. Like, it is such a reminder that God gave me a body with muscles that can grow strength. And it's really a beautiful thing, especially like as a mom of 2 kids. I'm like, my body feels so weak. But anyway, so I see this, woman who just walked out of Athleta, who's looking amazing and has every pose where I'm like shaky and, I can't quite balance. And there was something that like flipped in my brain that day, where instead of going, why can't I do it like her? Or why don't I look like her? Instead it was, wow, she's strong. She's amazing. Look what she's doing over there. And I could admire and rejoice in who God made her, instead of having it be some sort of comment on me. Like, she's got nothing to do with me. It's none of my business where she got her clothes, or how long ago, or, or how many yoga classes she's been to. Like, it is none of my business. If I can look at something God made and go, that is amazing, then I can walk away free to be who I am and unconcerned with what that, in my brain could say about my ability or my appearance or, my clothes, whatever it was. So that was like, changing for me. And so now when I see there are so many podcasts, Esther, as you know, there are so many podcasts, and there are a lot of people right now talking about dreams. And it's like, go God. Like go, like, and go do your podcast, or go write your book about dreams, or like, it's not a threat to me. There is enough room in God's kingdom for all of us pursuing the dreams that he's given us. And it's fine. And, there might be opportunities for me to collaborate with one of those people one day, or they might reach a person that, would never listen to my podcast for whatever reason. Their computer doesn't have a D, so they can't type Devoted Dreamers. I don't know. I'm just being silly. But, it's just not worth the mind space
Yeah.
to compare ourselves.
And I think that when you can catch those thoughts when you're having them, because I've struggled with that too. I look at someone else and they're starting a new thing and it's like super similar to something I'm already doing. And I'm like, oh no, what's going to happen? But then I realized that is not from God, like you said.
Right. Yeah.
And it would be like us saying, well, there's one church in town, and so now we can't have any more churches because that one church is somehow going to reach all the people. Well, no,
They're going to
there's
get it
lots of
all.
churches because people like different things,
Right.
different styles. So yeah, I love that. And I think that's just a good reminder that if we can continually remind ourselves and shift our thinking and be excited for what God is doing, regardless of how it might be similar or different from what we're doing.
Yeah.
Then we're going to have a lot more fun.
Absolutely. And be more open. Like, you never know, like, what could come your way. And if you were like closed and opposed to like, well, I can't talk to that person because she's doing what I'm doing. It's like, no. Oh my gosh. What could you possibly do together? Like, that'd be amazing. So
absolutely. All right, Merritt. So I think we should probably wrap up. I feel like we could talk for like another hour.
I know, we really could.
This could be the longest podcast of my career, but but maybe we should do that offline.
Okay.
So I would love for you to share, our big thing that we talk about at the end of our episodes is leaders or learners. And you shared that input is one of your top 5 strengths. And I'm pretty sure it's one of mine too. So another thing we have in common. So I know you love learning. So tell me, what are you learning right now? Do you have a favorite book or podcast or something that you would want to share with the audience that they might want? And it's okay if you share more than one. Because I share like 3 or 4 every time.
So I'm in a little bit of a season of trying not to have so much input just because of time and energy and 2 small kids. But I will say there is one thing that I would really love to learn from. And there's a conference for Christian women leaders, communicators in Dallas every year called the Declare Conference. And it is on my list of something that I would love to attend. And so I can't endorse it as having been there because I haven't been, but it's someplace that I would like to go and learn from other Christian women communicators and network. I'm a conference junkie, but since having kids, it's like, it's really hard for me to go away and spend the night somewhere else. And it's really hard on my husband, and I have a 10-month-old baby. And so, I mean, there's a million podcasts and books and, but it's hard for me to pick just one of those. So I will let mine be the Declare Conference.
Okay.
In the fall.
It totally was.
In Dallas. And
but
maybe
like,
someday
she's not going to
if you
ask me
go, I'll see you there.
What am I learning right now?
And we actually had Rachel Gilbert on the podcast. I think it was episode 14. I'm going to double check and I'll put the link in the show notes, but she works with the Declare Conference and is part of it. So I was able to talk with her, and sounds like an amazing event. And I also agree. I haven't been there, but I think it is
can I
great
share
for Christian women that are looking to grow in that area. So
learn from.
All right, Merritt. Well, I really appreciate
This
you
might be totally
being on the show today and sharing your heart. And I just have one last question for you before we share how people can connect. Is there anything that I didn't ask you that you would love to share with the audience?
Oh.
Any last words of wisdom or encouragement?
Yeah, I mean, I will just say there is probably someone listening who I think we've maybe spoken to her earlier that doesn't know what her dream is, or wonders if there is a dream or if she got left off the list. I mean, I'll speak to her for just a second and just say that God loves you so dearly and you have not been forgotten. and he did not leave you off the list. And, you know, hold that with open hands, that if you long to have a dream given to you by God, that tell him that, talk to him about it, and believe that he's going to answer, and wait and see. You may just be in a season of waiting, and that is an okay place to be. He loves you deeply and dearly, and he sees
She
you.
is, I don't know if she's a co-founder. I don't know if she's, no.
Agreed.
So why don't you tell everyone, Merritt, because I know people are going to want to connect with you after this and check out all your stuff, your podcast and your Instagram and all of that. So tell us where we can connect with you after today.
Okay.
Awesome.
So
maybe we'll be
obviously,
able to be
Devoted
there at the same
Dreamers,
time.
you
That
can
would be really
find
cool.
all the places that you listen to podcasts, also on Spotify. And then I have been spending a lot of
There's
time
way
on
too many
Instagram,
things that
so
I
you
want
can
to go
find me
to,
over there.
and
My
I
handle
have
is
to
Merritt,
constantly remind
J-O,
myself
and
that
that's 2 R's
I
and 2 T's.
don't have to do all the things,
And I also have a
and that
Facebook group,
it's
which
not
is
actually
just our
good
little
for me to try
insiders
to
group
do all of
for
them.
podcast listeners.
And that includes like
that's
all the
the
travel and
Devoted
all the
Dreamers
conferences and
Insiders
all
group.
of it.
So find us there.
Yeah.
And you could, I'm pretty open to direct messages. So you can direct message me on Facebook or Instagram, and just love to know, what people are thinking or questioning or wondering, like, could this be my dream or whatever it is. I love to hear from people. It's super encouraging. And I've made a ton of friends on social media. It's just like, how did I make friends before? I have no idea.
It is actually such an amazing tool that we have, and it's so beneficial. Are you in our Purposeful Leadership group?
I am in there.
Yes. Okay. So that I was going to mention that you can find Merritt also in our group for our podcast. So that's an easy way for people to connect to. So
perfect.
Thank you so much, Merritt, for your time today and for sharing your journey with us. I appreciate you.
Oh, thanks for asking the questions. It was great.
Thanks for joining us on the Christian Woman Leadership Podcast. If you enjoyed this conversation, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss a future episode. We look forward to chatting with you next week. And don't forget, your leadership matters, and it's time for you to embrace your gifts and lead with confidence.